Hi, everybody. For this episode, we're joined by Tom Osborn from Nairobi, Kenya. He is the co founder and CEO of Shamiri Institute, which means thrive in Kiswahili. Tom is dedicated to systems change in his country, and his organization is committed to improving the mental health of young people that he cares so much about. Tom, thanks for being a guest on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Paul, and really excited for this conversation.
I am too, Tom. I share your excitement. Tom, you're a relatively young person yourself, at least compared to my age, but you've started this organization that is trying to solve this big problem in your country. How did you decide this is something you wanted to do?
So, just as you said, I'm a very young person, and that makes sense because Kenya is a very young country. So, the median age in the country is 19, and that's the same across most similar African countries. And so, I think that this is the greatest opportunity or challenge of my generation. So, if we can provide pathways to independent living for this very youthful population, then you have a great, opportunity on our hand. But at the same time, if we can't be able to do this, then we have a really, big challenge as well. And so I found this to be, a really big, bold, kind of like problem to think about and to try to solve. And yeah, that's why I, working in this space and trying to do something about youth mental health.
To me, it's impressive, Tom, that you're looking for something that's big enough and bold enough to take on as a career or a life challenge. I'm so inspired by that. I'd like to dive into that a little bit more, but I'd like to back up a little bit, Tom, and talk about your early years, your childhood. What was your growing up experience like? Did you have a lot of pressure on you to be super successful in your life?
So I was born and raised in rural Kenya. It's a small sugarcane community, and growing up in that community, there was very limited pathways and opportunities towards, independent living or doing something with your life. And one of those opportunities or paths that existed was education and academics. And so the path was you do well in school, you go to good secondary school outside of the village, you go to university, and then you have a path, to being able to lift your family and yourself out of the village, out of poverty. And so that was the backdrop that I found myself growing up in. And so there was a lot of pressure on me, my siblings, and my peers growing up to be able to succeed academically, because this was the only path that we had access to be able to like make something out of our lives.
Yeah. So your parents really were focused on your education and committed to making sure that you got the education. Are your parents educated as well? Did they go to secondary school or college? Or can you talk a little bit about your mom and dad?
Yes, my parents were also born and raised around the same place that I was raised. So my dad went through high school, but didn't go through university. My mom didn't finish high school. Unfortunately, when she was being raised up, it was a time when female education was not as valued. I would say, and so for both of them, and more specifically for my mom, they saw my education as an extension of their education. And so one thing my mom would tell me a lot is, I wasn't able to go to high school, and so I am going to high school through you, etc. And that kind of set the tone, right? So the pressure was not only for myself to try and make something
Yeah.
out of my own life, but also to give my parents an opportunity to also be able to some extent live their own dreams and aspirations through my life.
Yeah, that's great. I can sense how that must be a little bit of extra pressure having your mom vicariously go to school through you, but it seems like it's paid off because now you're doing incredible things for your country. We're all a product of our parents to some extent. What were your mom and dad like? Were they driven? Were they dedicated? And are you more like your mom or dad?
Yeah, so as I said, growing up, my both my parents were very strict about education and very strict about giving me the platform and the opportunity to be able to have an education. So what that meant, for example, is when I was, I think about 8 or 9, I moved from living with my parents to going to public boarding school, because that prepared me, or my parents thought that would best prepare me for the national secondary school entrance exam, which basically determined a lot of my future life prospects. And so, from both of my parents, I think the main thing I learned from that was the idea of quote unquote sacrifice, I had to be willing to not stay with my family. That was a sacrifice kind of to make to, have a shot at doing well in life, and they also had to, make a lot of sacrifices to give me, kind of this opportunities. To your question of whether I'm like my dad or my mom, I think depends on different things. I think from my mom, I have, kind of really picked up a lot of social skills. Like I've learned, empathy. I've learned the importance and value of community and selflessness. I think her life is a story of selflessness. And I think from my dad, I've really learned discipline. I think he used to run, he still runs like 5 kilometers every morning into his 60s. Really, very disciplined person. Yeah, and so those are the kind of things I've learned from the both of them.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you're a combination of the two. And Tom, I know your education was a real pressure cooker, that boarding school. They had high demands of you and really drilled you academically. And I met you, Tom, we've met because I found your TED talk that you did, and I was just so impressed by that. But we're going to post a link for your TED talk in our show notes, so if people want to go see it. But can you talk a little bit about was that hard on you to live and be in that kind of pressure situation? Or
I
did you
think,
find it helpful to learn to be so dedicated and committed?
yeah, I think, growing up, as we were going through that experience, just to kind of maybe paint a picture for our readers. So the nature of the Kenyan education system is that at the end of 8th grade, there's a national examination that every student in the country takes. And depending on how you rank on this exam, you will be admitted to different public secondary schools depending on how you rank. And so some secondary schools obviously well resourced, well ranked, better than others. We have a more quote unquote certain path towards going to university, etc. So for many families, and especially families like mine, the pressures to do well in this primary end of primary school exam. So you go to a good secondary school that basically puts you, on the path towards success. And so as we were preparing for this exam, not only do we live in the school for 9 to 10 months in a year, but the days are pretty long. So classes start at 5 in the morning and go up to 10 p.m. So it's a pretty,
Wow.
intense pressure cook environment. But going through it, how we saw this was that it was normal. This we felt at that point was just what it meant to, grow up and get an education and kind of come of age within this context, right? And obviously, in hindsight, that really trained us to be very disciplined and dedicated, etc. But, going through it, we didn't see it as, a quote unquote traumatic experience, so very tough, on us socially, emotionally, behaviorally. Though in hindsight, I can now see, how this experience was to a lot of extent really, you know, jarring and, really not good for our mental, physical health, etc. But, to answer your question, as we were just living through this experience, it didn't feel unusual. And there was to some extent a badge of honor in, going through that system and making it.
Yeah. I can see how the discipline part of it for sure would be really beneficial. So, in this system of school that you were in, it was preparing you to be some sort of leader, some sort of person of status in your community. Was there like a given occupation that you were supposed to be? Was it a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer? I mean, was it expected you'd move into something like that? Because now you're helping young people. I wonder, was that one of the avenues you chose, or did you have to kind of break away because it was different?
Yeah, so we had an acronym called DELL. So the four
Well, I'm
career
sorry, what
options.
was it called?
Dell, like Dell, like the
Yeah,
company
okay.
Dell.
Yeah.
And so the four options were you're either a doctor, engineer, lawyer, or a loser. Right. So you kind of had
Oh
to,
gosh. So
so you kind of
I
had to
hit on
choose.
something here. I expected it would be like that. Yes.
Yeah. Um, and uh, and that was also the order of prestige. So like doctor being the most prestigious, going kind of like on that way. So when I was studying ninth grade, it was determined that I should be a lawyer for two reasons. One, I really enjoyed writing. Growing up, I wanted to be a writer and a novelist, and so because of that, like I really love language classes, etc. So yeah, so that was the path kind of I was given, and so what that means is you at ninth grade, your whole like the subjects you take, everything is lined up, towards that goal. And so the goal was for me to go to University of Nairobi Law School, which is like the number one law school here in Kenya. I actually went through, so like I did everything and actually got an admission letter from the law school here in Nairobi, though I never attended. But that was like the plan for me. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you chose something else. So it really describes you as being kind of a non-traditional thinker, an outlier, somebody willing to take a chance on something else. And why did you choose helping young people? When you could have gone down so many different paths, why did you gravitate towards the well-being of young people in your country?
Yeah, I think the first experiences that led me towards, before even working for young people, just working for my community in general, were experiences that I had growing up as well. So more specifically, with my mom. So, in rural Kenya, how we cook is, we have firewood. And so we use firewood or we use charcoal for cooking. And a consequence of that is there's a lot of emission of smoke and other particulates that clog people's like respiratory tracts. And it's actually one of the, top killers of people in the developing world. And so in high school, my mom got diagnosed with a respiratory tract infection as a direct consequence of that. And so that was like the first point in my life where I was like, I have been on this path towards being a lawyer and, really working hard, for myself, but importantly for my family. And my mom is struggling with this problem and I'm not in a position to help, right? So I felt at that point was kind of a turning point in my life where I realized that, my education was great, but it will be better if I could use it towards, helping people that I care about and people who are, allowed me the opportunity to, kind of be where I am. So that was like the first, kind of turning point in my life, towards working, doing community-oriented work. And then for young, kind of deciding to work like with young people and for young people, it evolved over time. So the first experience was, also in high school. So when I was a freshman in high school, our class was about 200 students. By the time I was a senior, the incoming freshman class was about 600 students. It had almost grown 3 times. But the resources were the same, so same classroom, same everything. So just a little bit more cramped, it's a little bit more, kind of like difficult. And at the same time, the opportunities outside of high school were not growing the same way. So one, example is, for some reason, when we do the end of secondary school examinations, they cap the amount of students who can pass, because they only have so much slots in the universities. For example, when I was in high school, there were only 2,000 students who could get an A in the end of year secondary exam. So you had to be part of that in order to, and so basically what appeared to me to be a challenge was that all of us are growing up knowing that, okay, we need to go to high school, we need to do well academically, we need to be doctors, engineers, or lawyers. But now there is 3x as many people competing for still the, kind of amount of similar resources. And so it seemed to me that the number of quote unquote losers was going to, kind of like drastically increase, right? And so that was like the first, realization that made me just think that there will be a lot of opportunity to do something meaningful and impactful towards young people in Kenya.
Wow. Well, that's great that you saw that problem, and you're trying to solve it and give people the support they need. Tom, we're about halfway through our interview, so we need to take a short break. We'll be right back in just a minute. Tom, right before the break, you were telling us about your first time you saw the need to really dive in to help young people. But yet, you didn't just say, okay, I see this problem. You were looking for something that was big and bold, and you decided to attack mental health as the strategy to help young people. Why mental health? Why did you take that on? Why not just figure out how to better the education system or provide people entrepreneurial skills? But you chose to go after the well-being, the mental health of young people. Can you talk about why that path into the mental health of young people?
Yes, I think the 3 reasons that made me think that this would be the most effective way of doing this. So the first is, when I look back, kind of at my experiences, for example, in my community, we have something we call an age group. So this is a group of students, like people who were born around the same year, for example. And then you go through school together, etc., etc. So in my age group, I think we're about 12 of us. And only, I think, 2 of us graduated through high school. And I think I was the only one who graduated through university. And it wasn't because, I was the smartest or the most qualified, etc. I think I was able to, quote unquote, make it for 2 reasons. One was I was lucky that at particular inflection points in my life, where I could have, given up or like seen that, okay, there's only 2,000 people who are going to be able to succeed in this exam. There's 500,000 of us taking it. It's not worth it. I had people who intervened in my life, but they intervened not through, like buying books or, taking me through programming, but like, kind of like psychosocially, so that was, kind of like the one, thing. And the second thing is, I also realized through my experience, and eventually as well, it was reinforced through studying, kind of about this, that a lot of time especially, kind of like for young people who are like malleable and still have, kind of a lot of really great dreams and visions about the future. If you can't intervene to help them build, resilience, kind of strengthen their mindset and you kind of improve their motivation, then the effects, are profound and go beyond just, academics. They can extend as well to if they decide to do entrepreneurial ventures or, decide to go into the arts, etc. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, just a realization that mental health problems, though untalked about, though stigmatized, but really prevalent, So I think some estimates put it that almost 1 in 2 adolescents in Kenya struggle with some sort of a mental health problem. And what we and then and what we know from the literature is like the effects of these problems are very profound, right? So they affect how you see yourself, how you interact with your, friends and family and go through school. They'll affect whether you can get a job in the future, health outcomes, etc. Yet, as I was saying, quite untalked about and quite stigmatized. And so that also led me to think that this was a great place to work. And finally, this is a great opportunity for building a disruption in this space because it's so young and so new. There are very few people working around mental health. And so we have this opportunity to make mental health as we want it. We have this opportunity to build from the ground, and especially in doing like youth work, there's a great opportunity where you don't have to, be fighting the system or, the establishment, and it's just a clean slate, a blank canvas to build upon.
That's great. You sure have thought through this, and it seems like you've made the right decision, and you're picking up on something that seems so critical. Tom, as you've built Shamiri Institute, what have you learned about yourself facing the challenges, the struggles, the pushback you might get, the funding that you need, all these kinds of things? What have you learned about yourself through that process?
Yeah, I think one thing that I struggle with, and I'm sure, kind of a lot of people who work in similar settings and in similar space struggle with is the more you do this work, the more you realize things about yourself that you may not really like, So for example, working in the caregiving space, in the mental health space, I realize, for example, that I often put the health and well-being of other people before my own, and it's more of like a giving rather than a receiving or a taking culture. And one of the things that I have realized that I think I need to work on is I've realized that I haven't given myself enough opportunities to grow and make mistakes and, find myself, quote unquote, like who am I, kind of what my core, what do I want to receive and, grow through, etc. And so just realizing that I have spent so much time trying to build something and thinking about other people and at the expense of that, not really investing a lot of time and resources on my own, just being like aware and mindful of where I am. And yeah, and I think so that's one thing that I've realized that I need to, kind of like work on. I think one of the things I've realized, which I think a lot of us also realize as in the course of this work, is just how much resilience we have. Sometimes, like, how am I going to date? There's just so much burden and so much, bad things happening in people's lives that you have to help them deal with, and of course that also affects you and your life, and just realizing how strong I am sometimes in being able to navigate this and find strength to continue doing. I think so I've kind of surprised myself, kind of in that regard, if I may say. Yeah.
I've interviewed so many people for this podcast now, and that is probably one of the most common denominators of youth workers is that we take pride in other people doing well, and we're so focused on the success of other people that we forget about ourselves sometimes. And so to hear you say that is it's just so real, because that is a bigger problem, I think, in our field than we give credit to. We need to figure out how to take care of ourselves, because we can't help other people and solve problems if we're not whole ourselves and complete ourselves. Tom, are there things you do to improve that? Have you, I don't know, try to be intentional about your own well-being and your own success? Have you taken steps to try to do that? Or are you just so engrossed and so in a growth phase and developmental phase that you just don't have time to do that?
Yeah, I think it's easier said than done, because just like the realities of running a startup, working in these spaces, there are like new problems every day that kind of require and demand attention, and often seem more pressing, and higher, quote unquote, in the hierarchy of needs than kind of my own. So yes, I think I think, to be honest, I haven't been able to find the balance yet. I think what I've been doing is starting to reignite the things that I enjoy doing. So as I told you at the beginning, I wanted to be a writer, and so I'm carving on more time to to write, and to kind of try and reignite that passion and that connection. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things I'm doing to start allowing myself opportunities and moments to start engaging with other things that I enjoy and find satisfaction in, besides obviously the work that we're doing at Shamiri.
Yeah. Well, good luck to you. And I certainly can appreciate and relate with how it's easier said than done. I can definitely connect with that statement. Tom, I can't believe we're out of time already, but I want to thank you for being so willing to take a big and bold chance to help thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, this maybe someday not millions of young people, by addressing their mental health needs through a creative approach that we didn't even have time to get into. But again, I'm going to put the show notes for your TED Talk in this episode so that people can go watch that. It's so inspiring what you do, and for your age and your dedication and just drive and courage to solve a problem and make mental health in your country the way you think it needs to be solved is so inspirational. And I just want to thank you for all the work that you do and all the work you're going to do. So keep going, Tom.
No, thank you so much, Paul, for having me, and really, I'm also a really big fan of this podcast, and I think it's really great to listen to stories, of other like youth workers, young people working, for young people, and looking forward to maybe coming back again in the future. But thank you so much, and just to encourage other people to continue, with youth work. It's not always the most fancy or most beautiful work, but it's quite impactful and meaningful, and sets people, I believe, on a pathway that influences the outcomes of their lives beyond just when we work with them when they're young people.
Yes. Tom, I always like to give the guest the last word on their episode. What words of wisdom or inspiration would you like to leave with our listeners?
Yeah, I think my final word will be to encourage the listeners to the extent that they can, enjoy the process of youth work, often, we are really interested in outcomes, achieving this milestone, getting this thing off the to-do list. Well, and because of that, we may not find ourselves really embracing, kind of like the moment and, embracing, kind of like the process. And I think that's where the true satisfaction is, being able to wake up every day, to seize the day and to just enjoy every part of the process of the work that we do. And so, yeah, that's my final word to the listeners today. It's, more the most value is from the process of the work that we're doing and not the end goal or outcome or milestone.